People rarely reveal their true nature. In any house, even your neighbors, things can happen that you would never imagine. The events took place in Ipswich, Oregon, in June 1984. Davy Armstrong, a 15-year-old boy from the suburbs, was delivering mail in the neighborhood. Suddenly, the newspaper fell out of his hands and his attention was drawn to the headline. News about a missing boy, policeman Wayne Mackey, a neighbor to whom he delivered the newspaper. Davy asked him why there was no money in the mailbox. Wayne replied that he had forgotten and asked the boy to come in and help him lift something heavy, promising to give him the money at the same time. They carried the furniture to the basement. Davy was alarmed by the door, which was securely locked with a padlock. The young man asked the man what was in there under the red light. Mr. Mackey said that, despite being a police officer, he was passionate about photography, so he had set up a room for his hobby. After that, he thanked Davy and said goodbye. In the middle of the night, the boy and his best friends played hide and seek. Davy found a place for himself in the bushes, from where he could see Mackey's house. There was a young guy next to him in the house. Suddenly, his friends found his hiding place and scared him. When Davy looked back, they were no longer outside the window. After that, he and his friends gathered at their base, a treehouse. They stared at photos in an adult magazine. They also fantasized about Nikki, an attractive girl who was Davy's former nanny, and also a DJ. However, Davy himself brought up the topic of missing children. There had been a lot of news about it lately. Last year's disappearance in Hazleton, this year's in Freeport. Tommy reacted skeptically and called Davy a conspiracy theorist, which he basically was. Dale and Curtis also didn't believe in patterns, so the friends just made fun of Davy and wanted to get back to adult content. Davy's room was full of newspaper clippings about urban legends. He had been researching them for years and looking for evidence like a young detective. His father worked for 6 News, so he had an irregular schedule. In the morning, Davy collected trash scattered by raccoons near his house. His father was home, and Davy asked him once again for his camera so he could practice filming. But the camera belonged to the news channel, so his father couldn't give it to him. In the evening, Davy watched the news with his parents and found out from his father that Nikki's parents were getting divorced. Davy could see Nikki's room from his room. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was his father's colleague calling with news about a killer who was hunting teenage boys. So, his father rushed off to work. Davy immediately grabbed his walkie-talkie and contacted his friends. He told them the news and ran to watch TV. That day, the local newspaper received a letter from the killer. The anonymous person claimed responsibility for the elimination of 13 teenage boys and 2 adults, and provided all the information about the victims. The police checked the information and announced on television that this person was an active serial killer. They were looking for a white man, around 40 years old, living without a family. Davy discussed the situation with his friends, but they seemed indifferent. They were peeking at Nikki, while Davy asked them to show at least a little respect. She turned around and almost noticed them. Everyone except Davy had managed to hide, so she thought he was the one who had been spying on her. Why did that scoundrel reveal himself and write a letter to the newspaper right now? He had been committing crimes for years, and now he had raised the stakes. In the evening, the boys gathered a team of classmates to investigate and went to the house of their neighbor Hoffman, who had not been seen for several days. Davy suspected that something had happened to him because his neighbor was Officer Mackey. The Hoffman's car was parked in front of their house, so they couldn't have gone anywhere. But in the end, the boys went home. Davy's parents were coming home late from work, so Davy made himself some toast and milk for dinner, but he was shocked by the writing on the package. Dusty Devitt, the boy Davy had recently seen through the window at Wayne's house, had disappeared. He immediately put forward a theory to his friends. Mackey was the culprit. They didn't believe him, but he explained that Mackey's neighbors, the Hoffmans, had witnessed something terrible that had happened to Dusty. That's why Mackey had eliminated them all. In addition, the neighbor's son had previously told Tommy that Wayne buys 100 pounds of soil every week, explaining that it is for the garden. But that's a lie. Who needs that much soil for the garden every week? The portrait of the criminal in the newspaper, 40 years old, living alone, looked a lot like Mackey. Officer Wayne's reputation was impeccable, but Davy was convinced that it was just a trick up his sleeve. Mackey had the opportunity to destroy evidence and knew how to cover up crimes. After all, who would suspect a cop? Davy suggested that the boys follow Wayne to gather evidence, and they eagerly agreed. Every morning, Mackey left the house at 8:24 a.m. with a gym bag. He returned from work at 6:25 p.m. He spent a lot of time gardening and spent every weekend in different places. At 11 p.m., he went for an hour-long run on an unknown route. Now they understood Wayne's schedule. The guys returned to base, where Davy watched Mackey through binoculars. At 11 p.m., as usual, he would go for a run. And that was the plan. Davy wanted to check the contents of Wayne's trash can, but in the end, they found nothing suspicious. Dale asked Davy to stay with him for the night. The boy agreed, and Dale went home to get his things. But at home, Dale saw his upset mother, so he decided not to go anywhere and stay home for the night. When Davy came downstairs after hearing the doorbell ring, he thought it was Dale, but was surprised to see Nikki on the threshold. She came in, took a soda from the fridge, and went to the boy's room, noticing that her windows were clearly visible from there. She felt nostalgic for the days when she was his nanny, but suddenly his parents returned. Nikki climbed out the window so as not to arouse suspicion. That same night, a teenager was walking home late. He was frightened by a noise behind him and quickly ran around the corner, but he was unable to escape the horror. In the morning, Officer Mackey put on his uniform and went to work. Meanwhile, Dale's mother, who had returned late yesterday, slept late on her day off. The boys took advantage of this. They put Dale behind the wheel and followed Mackey, who had gone to the hardware store. In the car, Davy told them about yesterday's meeting with Nikki, but his friends didn't believe him. Meanwhile, Mackey bought not only bags of soil, but also a pickaxe and shovels. They continued their surveillance, but on the way they almost crashed into another car, so they decided to go home. Near their house, they were stopped by a police car. The boys were scared, thinking that Mackey had exposed them. But no, it was a friend of Dale's mother. They were lucky. He told them that another child had disappeared and advised them to stay home and not wander around town unnecessarily. Mackey came home late in the evening, switching from his work car to his own. The soil, pickaxes, and shovels were gone. While Davy was watching, Nikki waved at him. They went out for a walk. She told him about her parents' divorce and how it affected her, complaining that all her friends' parents were happy together. Davy supported her, assuring her that there is always more going on behind closed doors than we know. He also decided to share his suspicions. Officer Mackey was guilty of crimes. She was very surprised because Mackey was friends with her dad, and she thought it was a mistake. Nikki warned him to stop following Wayne and leave the case to the police. In the evening, Curtis brought adult drinks stolen from his father's stash. They tasted it and found it awful. They had been following Mackey for several weeks, but to their disappointment, they had no evidence. In the middle of the night, they went to the Hoffman's house, but this time the door was open. They went inside, where there was no light. Tommy smelled a terrible stench. The kitchen was a mess. Suddenly, the phone rang, making the boys jump. Dale went to turn on the light when suddenly, at that tense moment, a hand reached for the switch from the hallway. It was Nikki. It turned out that she was looking after the cats while the Hoffmans had gone to their summer cabin by the lake in a rented trailer. The boys explained why they had come, thinking that the worst had happened to the family. The next day, they planned something else, to install a radio near Mackey's bedroom window. Davy and Dale were to do this while the others spied from the other side. Tommy noticed that Mackey was wearing gloves and had taken bleach, and there was a blood stain on his white shirt. Mackey went down to the basement, whose windows were painted over. As Davy ran around the house, Wayne opened the window and spotted him. At that moment, Davy's heart stopped with fear, and he ran away. Mackey knew that the neighborhood children were playing hide and seek, so he probably didn't suspect anything. The next morning, while delivering the mail, Davy went to the window to check if the radio was still there. Suddenly, Wayne appeared. Davy quickly apologized for the nighttime misunderstanding. Mackey had to pay for the mail again. They went into the backyard, and Davy saw something that looked like a fresh grave in the garden. Mackey asked what the device on his belt was and offered him a couple of old police radios. The boy refused, saying it was time for him to go. It seemed that Mackey suspected something. In the evening, watching from his room, Davy saw Wayne in the window for the first time, looking at him through binoculars. This frightened the boy so much that he immediately hid under the windowsill and told his friends on the radio that he was calling an emergency meeting at their base. So, the plan was this. Curtis and Dale would follow Mackey during his run, while Davy and Tommy dug up the garden. While the boys were waiting, Mackey went into the garage. Through the slightly open door, Dale noticed bags of an unknown substance. Suddenly, Mackey heard a noise and went over to the dumpster, but the boys were already gone. He got into another car and drove off somewhere. His friends reported over the radio that they had lost him, but Davy didn't hear it. The search of the garden turned up nothing until their eyes fell on a wooden shed in the backyard. It was locked, but Tommy, who knew how to pick locks, easily opened it. Inside, there was only junk and tools, but that wasn't all. There was a t-shirt belonging to Dusty, the missing boy Davy had seen in the window. Soon Dale and Curtis arrived, and they all returned to base together. Dale remembered seeing bags in the garage with writing that looked like Noah. Curtis immediately corrected him, suggesting that it was probably the chemical formula for sodium hydroxide. This substance destroys the chemical bonds that hold flesh together and eliminates the smell of decay. After gathering all the evidence, Davy told his parents everything. However, his father did not believe his son. Instead, he scolded him for spying and vandalism, and worst of all, demanded that the boys apologize to Mackey. It was humiliating. He took them to the officer and forced Davy to confess everything. His son told how he had seen Dusty in the house and admitted, "I thought you were the killer." Mackie just laughed in response. Wayne explained that it was his nephew who was helping around the house and even offered to call him to confirm, but Davy's father refused. Davy wasn't going to give up, but now he was under house arrest. At home, he was practicing picking locks when Nikki suddenly called him over. She told him she was going to Stanford soon. He shared with her how betrayed he felt that his father had forced him to apologize. His friends no longer wanted to help with the investigation, and Nikki also advised him to forget about the case. The next day, Mackie knocked on the door, in uniform and with a gun on his belt. Wayne assured him that the police were doing everything possible to find the criminal. Davy answered briefly, trying to end the conversation quickly, but Mackie insisted that he wanted to establish contact and asked 3 times to come in, but was refused each time. Then Davy asked if he could at least call his nephew. The officer agreed, but on condition that he do so from Davy's house. The boy ran to get the phone, and at that moment, Mackie quietly entered the house. Fear gripped Davy, and he grabbed a knife from the kitchen just in case. He handed the phone to the officer, but his nephew did not answer. Davy mumbled an apology, and the police officer left. However, Davy was no fool. He called directory assistance and found out the last number dialed. It was Wayne Mackey's number. He was calling himself. Davy immediately told his friends everything. Suddenly, the news reported that the criminal had been found and arrested by Wayne Mackey. Davy watched this absurdity with anger. Now his friends called him schizophrenic, but he decided to try one last time to sneak into Mackey's basement with his father's camera. Tomorrow everyone would be at the beach festival, so he shouldn't get caught. Curtis was supposed to make sure Mackey stayed there. Reluctantly, his friends agreed. It was their last chance. At the festival, Curtis kept his eyes on Mackey. Meanwhile, Davy slipped into the house through a window with the camera. Dale went with him. Suddenly, Nikki noticed them and, without hesitation, joined them. The basement was dark. Curtis was suddenly overcome with doubt. He abandoned the plan, convinced that Mackey needed the soil for a police project involving flower beds at the festival. But that didn't stop the others. The 3 of them descended into the eerie darkness of the basement. Meanwhile, Tommy, who was waiting on a bench, was supposed to watch for Mackey's car. Suddenly, he heard footsteps. It was Curtis who scared him and convinced him of the officer's innocence. So Davy lost another ally. Davy broke the lock on the mysterious door. Behind it was a room with Mackey's childhood things and a bathroom. And in the bathroom was a lifeless body. Another boy, barely alive, who had recently disappeared, was lying nearby. They pulled him out, and in the hallway, Davy suddenly realized something terrible. The photos on the walls were not of Mackey's family. They were his victims. And among them now hung a photo of Davy himself. They took all this horror, filmed on camera, to the police. The chief gave the order to arrest Mackey and called Davy a hero. On the way home, his parents admitted their mistake and apologized. They were sincerely proud of their son. Dale stayed overnight at Davy's house. They had been looking for Mackey for several hours. It seemed he had nowhere to hide. But at 12:15 a.m., the stairs from the attic descended into Davy's room. It was Mackey. He had been hiding there all this time. Davy barely had time to open his eyes before he felt a cloth soaked in chloroform on his face. He came to tied up in a car. Dale was next to him. They managed to untie each other, but suddenly the door opened. They were in the middle of the forest. The boys ran away, and in the darkness between the trees, the hunt began. It turned out that they were on a tidal island, the place where Mackey disposed of bodies. Looking for a way out, Davy ordered Dale to run to the car, deciding to distract Wayne. But when Davy was hiding, Mackey found him and stabbed him in the leg. While Davy was lying immobilized on the ground, Wayne caught up with Dale and eliminated him. Mackey blamed Davy for everything, but simply ending his life would have been too easy. He wanted Davy to live, looking over his shoulder, waiting every moment for him to return. With that, Mackey got in his car and drove away, leaving the boy alive. Limping, Davy made it to the road, where a man picked him up. On the way, they saw Mackey's burning police car. Davy was taken to the hospital, but what hurt the most was not his wounds, but the realization of what had happened to Dale. His friend had not left him alone when he went into the lion's den, and that was why he had fallen victim. And Davy now had to carry that burden for the rest of his days. After all, anything you would never imagine could be happening in any house, even your neighbors. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss interesting movie stories.